Kia ora tātou, welcome back everybody to our Committee of Council meeting for Wednesday the 15th of June. So we're now into any additional recommendations around finalising the annual budget plan for 2022-23 and we have an additional motion here that the committee recommends that $220,000 be applied to complete the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan, including public engagement, and this program be a one-off operational expenditure in the 2022-23 year, be funded from the 21-22 operating surplus. That's moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Barrett. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I know some people are not very happy about this recommendation, but I guess the gist of it is that we have come this far, and I think this is a piece of work that needs to be completed. We have invested a significant amount of money multiple times over the last several years to try and get some sort of coordination around the planning in this area, particularly with two key buildings being Te Manawa and the library. And I know that people have got different views around what the content of the plan may be, but my opinion is that we just need to get a plan in place. Once the plan is brought back to elected members, a decision can be made around the extent of what that will look like in practice, whether we go forward or not. But at the moment, we haven't actually had a plan presented for decisions to be made. My view is that this piece of work is very much like a district plan for this particular part of the city centre. It's about designating certain spaces for particular activities, and at the moment there isn't a joined up approach, and the plan will be the solution to that. So I think that if we stop now, we are excluding our community from participating in this. We are basically putting a pause to any coordinated effort, and any individual buildings that need to be addressed through earthquake issues, for example, are going to be done in a very piecemeal way. So I think we've got an opportunity to put some good planning in place. Like I say, it doesn't commit us to the actual work. A decision can be made on that, but I think that actually we need some budget to get the master plan completed so that it can come back to council for a decision. So I would encourage you to support this.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I won't be supporting this for all the reasons I described last week, but just quickly to add, officers gave us a good reassurance last week that the main issues in terms of the earthquake strengthening, that work would continue whether we continue with the civic and cultural precinct work or not. So on that basis, I don't think it's a good enough reason just to keep doing something because we've come this far. The work that's being done can be paused. We can pick it up down the track when there's a more appropriate time. I do think that anything further needs to have some endorsement by the community and have some consultation before we add extra budget in. So I'd prefer to see that happen through an annual budget or a long-term plan process rather than us boxing on in the next financial year with a piece of work that simply has not gone well so far, has not had good input from elected members, and probably needs a little bit of redirection. So no, I won't be supporting this budget at this time.
Councillors, I was out of the debate last week, but I sort of caught on the threads of it. Look, we've had stage one and the start of stage two. I mean, this hasn't been proved to us yet, and I think we've got to be careful we don't mix it up with earthquake proofing. Do we need a plan? Yes, I think we do. But the process here has been appalling, to be fair, and we've been, unfortunately as elected members, we've been lumbered with it. I think this would be like saying, we've got a builder, he's done the foundations and we're sort of happy with that, he's starting to put up the walls, and then he comes to us and said, oh, I need all the money for the roof. He hasn't come back and finished the walls, but we're still going to pay him for the roof. I just don't think we should be going that far yet. Let them prove Stage 2 of this, which, to be fair, is $500,000, has yet to have full input of everybody. I've certainly seen only what you've seen, and I would have to say we need to, it's a good start, but it's a start. We need to see the rest of it. So please don't mix this up as an earthquake proofing program or some plan for that. They clearly told us it wasn't. It was a plan to show what the future proofing of our precinct could look like. The fact that there's been almost zero commercial involvement tells me there's still got some way to go. So I've got an open mind. I'd like to address this in the proper forum, not on the rush like this. And as I said, it would be like asking a builder to paying a builder for a whole lot of work that they haven't even completed the first part yet. So this would be like really paying for a whole lot of extra stuff on a wing and a prayer. So I'm certainly not going to approve this at this stage. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, this is really interesting because the process has been, in my mind, quite poor. And last week's debate actually had the other 130,000 on, which we clearly weren't happy with, and that didn't get approved. That's where the figure 220 comes back to. My feeling is a bit like yours, Mr Mayor, that we've paid a certain amount of money to get up to think that we're going to get a bit further down the track in many cases, and like this is like paying for the roof, and we actually haven't even had the financials, which were imminent. And so there's some basic fundamental stuff I thought we would have had by now, rather than a 2-hour workshop and a 1-hour meeting. It's just like with not any financials. It's just the whole thing's been really really poor. But I've got to be pragmatic in the point where we've got so much work done, so much engagement, and this is already the second time we've been round the mulberry bush on it, because we had it done last term, as it was debated last week, that I don't want to not get it done so we actually get some results so we can go out with longer term planning. And so therefore I feel like we're between a rock and a hard place of actually having to agree with this to actually get some actually ultimate outcome. Because otherwise a house standing with frames up without the roof is never going to be lived in and kind of getting the true value of. It's kind of like it's going to sit there and it's going to look, you know, unfinished. And that's exactly what this project is. So to even commence on the project and have the last stage not even committed seems again poor. But you know, the lack of engagement that we've had as members has just been unprecedented in my mind. For want of a word, instead of using it for COVID, I'll use it for the civic and cultural precinct. It's unprecedented that we've never had involvement on it, that it's got to a stage that's almost finished without any community engagement. And all we asked for, and that's still my catch cry, is that we wanted a budget, some timeline, and some community engaged feedback, and we still don't have that. And so, expressing again my frustrations in a more moderate way than I did last week, but in this case, I'm being pragmatic, and I'm going to support the amount going into the budget, a bit like the lines of the Deputy Mayor around wanting to have provision for a district plan type of model. We had the Reynolds plan back from, I think, the 70s when this first was built, and the convention centre thereafter. This is kind of like an updated, modern version of that, I guess, and so I see it as being a very key strategic piece of work, vital to transform the inner city, and so I feel like we've got little choice in many ways to carry on with this piece of work and get the roof on and get some value out of it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and much along the lines of the last speaker, I think the essential thing at this point is that we do get this to a point of readiness for engagement with the community so that we can get community views in the mix and continue to work through our views as elected members as those community views come to us. And I guess I'd push back a little bit on where the mayor was coming from in terms of seeking to divorce this from the earthquake story. I don't think that we can fully create a separation there. The reality is that this precinct includes some really big buildings and some really big forward investment. This is going to be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make those investments in a new library, in a new museum, And we want to be in a position to leverage those huge investments with some private investment alongside. And this is the tool that helps us develop that leverage. So I'd urge you to support it on that basis. The reality is that those are time-bound processes, and we need to keep moving forward on this. So urge you to support.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I was really just going to say that in respect of this whole master plan situation, I really sense a frustration from council members who have been on this pathway a lot longer than I have. And that frustration, I think, probably sometimes boils over into, you know, we haven't been communicated with enough. We want more of this, we want more of that, we want more certainty about the plan and the processes that we're actually going through to actually get to where we want to go. I just urge people to put those frustrations aside. I think we're starting to actually get some traction in terms of communications and actually being included into the process. My fear is by not going down, spending $220,000, we won't get a master plan, but there's a good chance we won't get any plan. So I think it's money that we need to spend to get us to the next place. Thanks.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Along the same lines, basically if we don't invest this, we won't get a plan, and therefore we won't be able to show that to possible investors and get the investment we want, especially as we've got key projects like Te Manawa, the library, and the rest of it. So it's just a case of let's just get the thing finished, and we've then got a baseline for the city, and then we've got something to take out there. So no, definitely for putting the money into this to finish it.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am going to support this mainly because I would like the opportunity to feed back into whatever plan we end up coming up with. I think that's been one of the things that has been missing so far. So if we don't end up investing in this, then, you know, we end up with nothing after all of this work. So I think now is the time to invest in just making sure that we finish the job in terms of having a plan, and then seeing what elected members think of that plan, and then moving on from there. But we can't even do that if we don't have the plan to start with. So I will be supporting this recommendation. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right, back to Deputy Mayor for right of reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just in brief, I think this is an opportunity for us to influence some good planning outcomes. We're not committing to any build or development investment, and it's giving us an opportunity to get some information, get some community views so that elected members can make an informed decision when it does come time to look at budgets for the long term. So I would encourage you to support this.
All right, we will vote. And that is passed, 9 votes for and 6 against. Right, we'll go to the next one. And this is around finalising, again, the annual budget, an additional motion that Chief Executive reduce the 22-23 capital new program by $8 million, that the capital consider any, that the council consider any impact programs as deferrals during the 23-24 annual budget process. Councillor Dennison.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I was encouraged by the close vote from the 15, although it failed, for the 15 million before the break. But I'm now moving it in a similar vein for a lesser amount and hoping that we can get buy-in from members to make this happen. The rationale for this is that our plan now required another 8 million worth of capital than what our draft originally did. And so reducing this by 8 million would be in line with our draft annual budget. The other aspects around it is that members were saying before we shouldn't leave it for officers without direction on that, and concerns around some of the legal requirements that we have with compliance, and even around some of the the failure of our systems and our assets if we don't. And I don't have concerns around that. A lot of that's been committed already, as the GM has said. What this is for an additional amount that, if I was to split it, it was to fund additional capital that wasn't in the plan, and it's also what I understood from the officer response was also in a recognition of to do with the lower surplus that we've been used for operational funding. So I didn't quite understand the second part of that, but nevertheless, let you know that there is a list that I'm aware of that's going to be put up one by one otherwise, which is to the value of just under 8 million. I think it's 7.5 thereafter, and we can go through the exercise to do that. But otherwise, I want to just be a little bit more generalist, put it forward in a dollar figure, and you've seen the terms that it's been moved in, and I just want to make sure the arguments that we've been put before, I don't want to necessarily repeat, but the key theme is that council has never delivered $80 million worth of work, and this is actually going to be up from there anyway, with the more moderate amount being reduced from the 90-odd million. And so I'm thinking this takes the pressure off staff. The point around have we got enough contractors in the region to actually execute the work is very questionable. And many of the carry forward budgets are going into activity spaces that we've got similar amounts or even more in the budget to try and do the even more plus the carry forward. I just don't think is realistic. So many of those arguments in line of debate were brought up on the other item, but so therefore I'm not going to prolong it. But, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, this might come as a surprise to people, but I'm going to vote against this. I actually think that the recommendation is procedurally incorrect, not in terms of meeting procedure. I'm not talking about standing orders. I'm talking about the recognising that a reduction in the budget would be seen in the future annual budget as deferrals. I actually think that elected members don't want to wait until the following annual budget to find out what's been deferred. I think, if anything, there would be a desire, certainly in my experience, elected members have wanted to have more control, not less, over what is deferred and what's not. And so I am quite surprised at the recommendations coming through around leaving it up to staff, because whilst that's been recommended in the past, that's not necessarily been how elected members have wanted to approach things. And often there's been comments saying that they would prefer to have programs come back for a case-by-case basis for deferrals or any delays. So I actually think that that's not correct, and that's not the intent of how elected members have wanted to deal with things. In terms of the outline from Councillor Dennison that if this fails, there'll be a series of recommendations coming through to the value of about $8 million. Well, personal preference, I'd prefer to vote those down one by one if necessary. I'm not supporting that as a collective now, and I guess I'm signalling I'm probably not going to support them then either. I think that actually we have been through this. This is an incredibly frustrating recommendation to come back up after we went through a very, I was going to say tedious, very detailed process in recent weeks that we put quite a lot of effort into addressing these programs that have been put up one by one. We have had very clearly the risk to the organisation outlined to us multiple times, again this morning, around where these reductions would actually fall, and I don't want to put the organisation in that position. I hear what people are saying around whether we can get the work done or whether contractors are available, but at this point in time, the advice from officers is that this program of work can be undertaken, that people are available, and that this is the budget needed to do the required work. So I am taking officer advice on this. I have not heard anything from officers to the contrary. I've heard elected members make comments, but nothing from officers, and so I will be voting against this, and I will continue to be voting against these programs come up because we went through this a couple of weeks ago. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I have got a comment, but I also just wanted to ask you whether you're intending to accept, how many of these recommendations of reductions are you intending to accept? So if this fails, will you be accepting another one for 7 and then one for 6 and then one for 5?
If yes, that we have to accept them if they meet the threshold. We can take a rather ethical view on things if people want to, but I'm going to run this with a really straight bat, and and I've got advice that all of them bar one meet the threshold, but we're not there yet, so we're preempting that. So let's just deal with the one we've got in front of us.
Okay, well, I do feel that some elected members are really trying the patience of council here. As one who put up any number of programmes for reduction 2 weeks ago, some of which were successful and some of which were not, and I have been in discussions with Councillor Naylor since then about what further course of action we might take during this meeting. My own position is that having gone through 2 long days of looking at programmes one by one and putting up programmes for reduction, some of which were accepted by the majority and some of which were not, that to go through another round of that today is obstructive, really, to democracy, because we've had our opportunity to put stuff up. I've put stuff up that has failed, okay? That opportunity has been, and to have these repeated motions of slightly different numbers, I mean, theoretically, we could have an infinite number of motions between now and whenever, each one reduced by $1. I just feel that elected members are really trying, some elected members are really trying the patience of the collective here. But to speak to this, the same arguments apply as to the 15 million. These general sweeping cuts are not helpful in terms of giving direction to staff or in terms of achieving. In fact, I'm really honestly struggling to see what this would achieve. The reduction in rates is minuscule, $8 million in terms of the capital programme. I'd be really grateful in the right of reply if the mover could explain to me what they thought the advantage of this is, even if it were passed. And to my mind, the risks and disadvantages of passing it are just way too big. So I'm really struggling with this, and I would counsel elected members not to try and thwart the will of the council, which has repeatedly voted against these sorts of cuts.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a very clear view around this. We need to own any specific cuts as decision of council. We need to own the decision, we need to own the impacts, and we need to make that on an informed basis. And taking an untargeted multi-million-dollar cut days out from finalizing the budget, it's exactly the opposite of relieving pressure on staff. It's putting them under an extraordinary and very unfair form of pressure in which they're supposed to gaze through a crystal ball, work out what's the best to pause, what's the best to advance, and then potentially get blamed for the next 12 months because the crystal ball didn't actually work. So this is not the way forward in terms of being fair to staff. It's not the way forward in terms of good, robust decision-making at this table. You know, Councillor Dennison gave a perfect example of potentially what plays out here, because he expressed some very clear views around although it's an untargeted recommendation, some ideas of where that might flow. Well, I have some ideas of where that might flow as well, and I'm sure everyone else around this table has those ideas about where it should flow. The only way forward from here is to go to a line-by-line test. Now, like some others have just said, we've had 2 days of line-by-line tests. I'm not sure how many more days of line-by-line tests we need, but that's the only proper process from here. This is no way forward, and I'd urge you to reject it on that basis, and we enter a line-by-line debate.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My list. I am not going to read it out again, but I will if necessary, believe me. But I go back to the fact that those capital programs, there was $74 million in the long-term plan, and we already reduced it by $10 million. So what's different about 2 years ago and 3 years ago when these capital programs haven't been delivered? Well, the staff are different. We've got new infrastructure management staff in there. We've got new processes. They're looking at contracts differently. Now, if you vote for this, you are saying that you do not have confidence in our staff. And I do have confidence in our staff. The staff have already stood up and said that they can deliver this. If you take the budget out, there's no hope in hell that they'll ever be able to deliver it because they've got no budget. There's no impact on the rates. So what is the absolute point? I think it must be for political gain through, because again, I say it's election year. So going back, there's no rates reduction on this. You're risking the fact that you're going to end up with $8 million worth of work that you could possibly have got through this year. If you stop it, it's certainly going to be more expensive in the next 2 or 3 years. And to me, it just does not make sense. And I mean, $8 million, you know, the inflationary value of that $8 million over 2-3 years, it just makes it more expensive. Look at the animal shelter. So, I mean, if we've got no budget, we've got no hope of getting it done. And so my advice to the staff is if these councillors vote for this, I would suggest you come back and suggest that the $8 million should be the BPO and it should be the Papaioa housing. And I think that would solve your problem, because I cannot see that would get voted for. It would be unanimously thrown out. So if they can't trust you with the budget, then they can't trust you with the $8 million selection. So it really frustrates me.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I do have a bit more confidence in staff's integrity than to do what the previous speaker has just suggested. I will be supporting this. I do think it's a pragmatic approach. I'm not going to repeat all of the reasons that I said this morning in terms of just trying to find a more realistic plan. But just do want to make the point. I hear from elected members that there's concern about not having visibility of what those programs might be. That would be identified in the paper that would come back in 2 weeks' time. So it's not that we're waiting a whole year to see those. We would see those and decide whether we approve them in 2 weeks' time. So the carry forward is for those programs that are deferred to be considered next year in the annual budget. So I'm not sure if that's just a misunderstanding by some elected members about the intent of the wording, but just wanted to clarify that. But I'm very happy to support this as a pragmatic way forward.
Back to you, Councillor, for right of reply.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hey, I hear the frustration, and it has been a lengthy time. We had 15 hours 2 weeks ago, over 2 days, a morning of it, and an afternoon now. And the reason for it, from my mind, is I still don't feel like we're there yet. We've done another mechanisms of doing the differentials, doing the UAGC, and doing all these adjustments, but I still don't feel like we're there yet. And this is still a time for us to roll up our sleeves and give it our best work. So I'm happy to go line by line. I was just wanting to be pragmatic, and typically I would be wanting to go line by line myself. So I hear you, and so I'm happy to do either or. I'm just trying to be pragmatic. As far as asking for the rationale why, well, there's a range of reasons. You talk about putting the pressure on staff. I actually think this is a helpful measure to take the pressure off staff. I think it adds a clearer focus to their work on the stuff that needs to be done. I think it's more realistic than not acting on this. I think we've had huge carry forwards, and some of them are landing on budgets that also have sizable budgets. And so therefore, I've got a huge question mark whether we can actually activate and achieve a full execution of the double up, essentially, of a budget on this year, when we know we've got staff shortages, when we know there is demand on our contractors in our wider region, and we know there's pipeline delivery, supply chain issues, all of that in a light of people having interest rates on their property prices going up, cost of living, all these other aspects, for them to stretch their dollar, knowing that we've done our best work for them as ratepayers. And I just see this as part of a robust decision-making and making sure that we can actually get to our bed tonight knowing that we've given this our best work on behalf of the city. So, therefore, if I'm pragmatic, I want to move it in this form, and if not, I'm happy to go consider each one by one. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. We will now go to the vote, please. And that has failed. 7 votes for and 8 against. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Okay. I've just got advice on this one, that this one will need to be declined because it's an exact repeat of what we debated.
Point of order.
And it has the same effect under Standing Order 2.25.1. It's a repeat notice of motion, and it's the opinion of the chairperson that it has the same effect.
Point of order, it's not the same because the budget has increased by 130,000. The resolution in our minutes was for 1.443 million.
Look, it has the same effect, and it might have a slightly different dollar value to it, but as the chair, I'm going to reject it. I can get some officers to speak to that if they wish to. Yeah, I'd like somebody to speak to it because the program line has increased by $100,000. Is that correct?
130.
130.
Steve Patterson, Strategy Manager Finance. In terms of the budget, the way it's presented, it is marginally different from what was in the original meeting, and the committee approved in one of the schedules at the last meeting the program being increased by that roughly $100,000 because as that was now the latest assessment of the cost. But the effect of the resolution, as you have said, Mr. Mayor, would be to stop the work, which is the full amount of the work that's proposed there.
Yeah, thank you. So in my opinion, I'm going to reject it because it is a repeat notice of motion with the same effect. Now, I haven't got that opinion on the others, but that's what that one is. So unless somebody's going to challenge me, and we have to have... We've already had one procedural motion here this morning, or an attempt, so I'm just going to leave it at that. All right, we're going to move to the next one. So we've got another one. This is around the capital program, and the committee recommends that the budget for the following program is deferred. And this is around program 1676, 150,000 participation in council meetings. And Councillor Naylor.
So councillors will be familiar with this program. I'm proposing to defer it primarily as there is also $80,000 in the budget as well, which is a carry forward to improve participation in council meetings. And I know when we discussed it prior to the annual budget going out for consultation, it was only marginally supported to include this one as well. There was some commentary at the time that this would provide for around 4 cameras in the building, in the room, to be getting from different angles. Personally, I think there does need to be some improvements, and I think that 80,000 will deliver on that. I don't think we needed the slightly more extravagant, complex system that had been outlined for the additional 150.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Could we ask an officer comment on impact?
I'll respond to that through the chair. Yes, there was $80,000 in the budget, and when we actually looked at the needs of the chamber, we weren't able to actually provide to meet the needs of the chamber for that $80,000. And the 2 quotes we got resulted in the program that is before you, with this figure plus the $80,000. The program is to improve the experience for public participation, as well as to fix the problems that we have in terms of ongoing technology hitches within the chamber.
Thank you. On that basis, brief comment. I might start that comment by just asking you to lift your gaze and look around the room. What I see is a lovely kind of like a rat's nest of wires. Most of them look like they came out of definitely last century. And what we know from the meetings in here is that we're regularly failed by the most basics of technology. There's a job here that not only needs doing, it is years overdue. How many times do we spend swapping these things around because they're not working? How many times do we spend trying to get somebody actually through the right audio channel so that we can actually hear them on the remote presentation? Honestly, it's been an embarrassing year in terms of the technology strain that's been on this chamber. We need to support this program so that we actually get up to a modern footing. So there's, just beg you, if you're gonna go find a sacrificial lamb, please don't make it this one.
Could I just ask the mover, is this the council TV one, is it? Is that what it actually is? Right, okay. Could I ask officers, the scope, what was the scope? Because I've heard that these things don't work, yet they're working today. All these wires are not compliant or efficient in today's standards. Can I just understand what the scope was?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We looked at a variety of things. So one of the key pieces is actually the audio. So we're working on analogue audio, and we're trying to run a digital system. So anyone that's logging in on YouTube, for example, gets this fantastic fuzz in the background the whole time. So they're trying to hear what the councillors are saying over the fuzz. So the audio was a part of it, as well as the visual. There was certainly no mention of 4 cameras. I'm not sure where the councillor got that from. The concept behind the multiple cameras was that there would be 2 cameras, so one would be the room view that you have now, but at least one that would be able to show the view of councillors themselves. So at the moment, when a member of the public is presenting to you online, when one of you asks a question, they have no idea who's asking that question because they can't see who's speaking. So those are the kinds of things that we were looking at in the scope.
And what's our average number of participants, viewers?
During a meeting, it generally gets up to around 60 viewers, and then following the meeting, we have usually around 200, 220, depending on the committee, over the following week.
Okay, so that's considerably increased since our debate.
I think those are the same numbers I gave you then.
Okay, the maths doesn't quite work out the same. Thank you. Look, I have some sympathy with this. It's interesting, we just had Manawatu Tech come in and talk to us about different things, and yet we're doing a council TV set, really. I mean, I understand this is the same system as Christchurch, and which has an editing suite. Yes, it does have the extra cameras. But the numbers that we had in the debate earlier on, my understanding this was sort of 15 to 17,000 per viewer, if you do the math. Do we need to improve? Absolutely. But I think some members need to go to some other chambers and have a look what's going on. And when we've got double-digit rate increases, I think we've got to think about some other people first before ourselves at times. Are we participating well? Yes. We're seeing our colleagues online at the moment, and I'm sure they're going to comment in a minute. But at 250,000 for our own IT needs within this chamber, I think it's just a little bit rich at this stage, especially with the issues we've got in trying to address our affordability. 80,000, and maybe it could be staged, but I certainly, hand on heart, cannot pay that $17,000 a viewer cost. I would support 80,000 or even a number in between, but I can't support the full program, so I'll support the motion. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. This is a capital programme, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So 150,000 deferred from a capital programme is an absolutely minuscule effect on the rates this year. So I just want to be clear about that. But secondly, I remember from the days of when I first came to council 6 years ago that, audiovisual facilities in the council chamber have been constantly pushed back and deferred. And the same arguments are used, we can't spend money on ourselves. I don't see this as spending money on ourselves. This is about spending money to make democracy widely available to people who, in a pandemic, are wanting to participate remotely. And those people are mostly members of the public who tune in to hear the meetings, but they're also elected members like myself, who, for the most part, I participate online because I'm shielding a vulnerable family member. And I dare say that other elected members have good reasons for participating online as well from time to time. The experience of trying to participate online at the moment is extremely difficult. You have to be, let me tell you, very dedicated to tune in to try and participate as an elected member in a council meeting online week after week after week. The technology is not up to the job. It's absolutely not. So I think to argue that this is going to somehow result in substantial savings to the rates is not correct. To argue that it's about council TV is not correct. It's about people being able to participate in democracy. And I'm really disappointed that this has been constantly deferred to the point where our facilities are not adequate. They're simply not. And let me tell you that as someone who's been participating online for the majority of time for the last few months. It's simply not adequate.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to agree with Councillor Johnson's comments. As somebody else who also spends a fair bit of time online, there have been moments where I have wanted to say something or make a comment or ask a question, and that moment has been missed because of technology issues, which does actually impact on being able to participate in this democracy. And this is a time where we want people staying home if they are sick. We don't want people spreading COVID. We don't want people even spreading the flu. We want them staying home if they're sick, but if they're unable to do that online in an efficient way, it does put those people who are staying home at quite a clear disadvantage. So I can't support delaying this technology upgrade any longer than it's already been delayed. Yeah, so I'll just leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, back to Ryder reply.
Thank you. I don't actually think this program has been deferred. I think it was a new one for this year, as far as I can recall. But certainly I support the 80,000 that has been carried forward and is still included being invested. Look, from time to time I go back and have a look online at meetings just to refresh myself about what was said, and I've certainly had no trouble being able to hear clearly and see what's happening. I certainly haven't had any feedback from members of the community who've also wanted to watch meetings online. And I also have participated in online meetings and have found the process quite smooth from my perspective. So anyway, putting it forward as an option, it's been said that this won't save much money. I think we need to think of the short term and the long term. Anything that's $150,000 capital new, the money has to be paid for that, the interest and repaid. So we can't just always take a short-term view on the impact to rates. With our spending, I think we need to be prudent with all of our spending, capital and operational.
All right, thank you. We will now vote. And that has failed. 5 votes for and 10 against. All right, we'll go, once we get that up. Right, we'll move to the next one, please. And this is around additional motion. The committee recommends the budget for the following program is deferred. And this is around program 2057, 800,000 regional shared path network improvements. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. This one and the next 3 are all items that have been identified in Schedule D of our last meeting, but weren't progressed just due to the lack of time. This one is also outlined in our papers on page 93 or 143 of our agenda. So this one and quite a number of other ones that I'm putting forward today are programs where there is a carry forward as well as a program amount. So this 800,000 is for this program, but there is also 765,000 carry forward for the same program. So this has been identified in the category 3 section by officers as a potential one that could be deferred. This would retain the 765,000 investment in the coming year into that program. So I think this is a pragmatic to defer this part of the program to next year.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wondered if we could have some brief explanation from officers as to what specifically this deferral would do.
Thank you, Councillor. I was picking that would happen. So, Hamish, if you could address us.
Good afternoon, councillors. Hamish Freakenby, GM for Transport and Development. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So this program is for the designation of the land between Ashurst and Palmerston North for the shared pathway there. There's work underway with lawyers as we speak to begin that process and engagement underway, as well as investigation into that program.
Thank you.
I do have a comment then, Mr. Mayor. Would you like me to take that now or later?
Yeah, no, away you go.
I'm not going to support this in this case then, because we received a quite substantial public comment, and from memory, I think there was even a petition regarding the delay that there has been in establishing the shared pathway between the city and Ashurst. And I think that the community would not want us to put a hold on this for any longer than we already have. There's already a feeling out there in the community that this has been delayed unnecessarily. And so I'm not going to support delaying it further at this point. I don't think that that would be what our community would want us to do.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On this item, we've got this quite a large carry forward because we haven't been able to get the negotiations completed. In fact, you're quite right, Councillor Johnson, there was a petition and there was a lot of public comment that came to Infrastructure Committee meeting earlier in this term, and pressing for the sake of not going for an alternate route going down the main highway, that they still want a river pathway. So absolutely clear on that. But what we've got, a situation is we don't have a willing seller. And in those recommendations, it was even put in to even use maybe the Public Works Act as a potential outcome, which all of this is going to take time to negotiate before we even have to do any property purchases. So therefore, I don't see a line of sight where we're anywhere close to landing this. I would have, ideally, like everyone else, loved to have seen that all resolved now and actually knowing that we've got some sort of agreement to purchase. We just simply don't. So therefore, the recommendation I fully support, not keeping the carry forward and the additional 800,000, because understanding that there's the 765 coming across and the 800,000 just to sit there. So I'm fully supportive of this. I think we're still a fair way off. I'd love an updated report to the committee, make sure that can happen before the end of the term. But right now, I think this again is one of those ones that's just been realistic. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do have a comment, but to be honest, the comment that was just spoken raises questions for me about process, because I'd understood that we're in a notice of requirement process and that work is in train. And I think fair enough to say we should get an update on it. Could we get that update at this stage so we actually understand where we're at?
I will ask. I'm not sure if we're going to get any more than we've already got.
There is a designation process underway. I think that was updated, maybe not the last Infrastructure Committee, but there is a designation process underway. As I understand it, formal communication has gone to the landowners to say that we're starting the designation process. I can get a bit more detail and come back to you.
I think that's sufficiently helpful for me to understand where things are at. By way of comment then, wouldn't it just be ironic if after 10 years and more of trying to actually advance this, we finally activate a notice of motion or notice of requirement process, and then we pull the budget? What sort of signal is that going to send to the community? What sort of signal is that going to tell to the very recalcitrant landowners in this process? We need to be there with process and budget to move this forward. I'd urge you to reject that on this basis so that as soon as we do get literally a path forward, we can build that path.
Yeah, look, I'll make a very quick comment just because others have shared. And look, I think the key with this one is we don't own the land. It's as simple as that, and we can be all wishful about it, and even with the process and designation, but it's simple. We just don't own the land, and there's multiple landowners too. But I do think it would be a little bit unwise to try and stop that process as it has started. So I won't support this on the basis that the process is in train. It may, Councillor Dennison is right, it may take some time yet, but I think we'd be somewhat foolish to perhaps pull this when we could be, at stage one of a 3 or 4 or 5 stage process. So I as much as I'm looking for cost savings as the other councillors are, perhaps this is the wrong one, so I won't be supporting it. So back to, I'm lost track now, back to the mover.
So I'm not suggesting that this work stop. I think it has been a slow process and we do want to progress it. What I'm suggesting is that the 765,000 that is in there as a carry forward should be adequate to progress it. And if for any reason that's not adequate to complete what needs to be completed in the next year, there's nothing to stop officers bringing that back to us as councillors. I just want to remind councillors the reason that we're here moving through some of these items line by line is that the community has asked us to reduce our costs. Since the draft annual budget, we have increased costs. Yes, we achieved a $2.7 million reduction at the last Committee of Council meeting, but since then there's been 4.3 added to our budget. So we've got higher expenses and 8 million higher capital requirements for the draft that is in front of us as compared to our annual budget. I don't see other councillors putting things forward as suggestions. I'm trying to find some options of where we can reduce some costs. I'm trying to be pragmatic about that. This is a suggestion, I think, particularly where there is a program where there is a significant budget carry forward and another budget. I think it makes sense to look at whether we can really deliver both lots or whether one can be deferred.
All right, we'll put this to the vote, please. And that's failed. 5 votes for and 10 against. All right, we'll move to the next one. And this is again additional motion around the capital program. The committee recommends the budget following program is deferred to 23-24. Program 2026, this is 206,000 around active transport measurement, and it's moved by Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. This is on the same page in our budget as the previous item, and on a similar vein, there is two budgets here. There's 140,000 carry forward, plus there is a 206,000 budget. It's also an item that was identified by officers in Schedule D of our last meeting under Category 3. So I think, we've got some very significant investment into active transport, and I think that's a really important area. The measurement of active transport I see as slightly less important than the actual delivery of active transport programs. So this is one that I think if we've got 140,000 in there, then I'm comfortable with that and comfortable with deferring the 206 till next year.
All right, are there there's no other comments to that? Oh, sorry, there is. Councillor Barrett.
Just briefly, we're in a serious deficit situation in terms of information and data around active transport. If you look at the information we have to hand as a council relative to what other communities do and other councils do, we're way off the pace. I've asked several times to get reports through to council in different ways that actually bring us some data. The reality is there isn't actually robust data, so we need to get some of the equipment in place. Again, this is a capital program, so we can simply get some counters so that we can actually get some good evidence to back up our decision-making that's coming to us, and I would urge you to support it on that basis. We should not be flying blind or biking blind.
Councillor Dennison.
I'll keep this getting briefer and briefer rather than repeating arguments, but this one here is again with the carry forward budget. We didn't expendiate, whatever you pronounce, you want to say that, 140,000 last year, so it's carried forward on top of a program of 206, and so therefore it's just this rationale. If we couldn't have done it last year, what makes us think we're going to still get these works done again this year on top of the extra carry forward? And so pragmatic, I'm going to support this. Thank you.
Okay, back to you, councillor, for right of reply.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I was in the queue. I didn't know if you didn't see me.
We missed you. Sorry, councillor Johnson.
Thanks. Just a quick comment, which is that when we were trying to discuss whether or not the cycleway trial on Main Street had been successful, there were very many elected members around the table that commented on the data and how the data had been obtained and whether or not we had enough data to make a decision. And I may be wrong, but I think one of those was Councillor Dennison, actually. So where we've got the option to improve our data gathering, I think we should be doing that and not putting it off further. This is information that we'll get from this that will help us to make the right investment. Or if we're doing stuff that isn't having an effect, then we'll be able to find that out. So I think it's a bit short-sighted to say that we're not going to be measuring how the active transport is going, because how will we then know whether what we're doing is effective or not? And when I think back to previous debates, many councillors have said exactly this in the past. So I think it would be very strange if we didn't decide to do this. Thank you.
Back to you for right of reply.
Thank you. I don't think anyone's suggesting that we shouldn't be measuring. I think what I'm suggesting is that 140,000 should be enough in the next year to progress that work. We need to ask the question, why has the 140,000 been brought forward in the first place? Is because that work hasn't been done. So it hasn't been a high priority to deliver that last year. I think let's use the 140,000 as a significant investment into measuring stuff. I don't think we need 246,000. So I'm proposing that we reduce this amount but retain the 140,000.
Okay, we will vote, please. And that has failed. 7 votes for and 8 against. Right, we'll go to the next one. Again, another additional motion around the capital program that the committee recommends that the budget for the following program be deferred to the 23-24 year. Program 1373, 72,000 citywide recycling drop-off facilities. Councillor Naylor.
So this one and the next one are slightly smaller programs, but we're identified in Schedule D under the Category 4, which is the highest category that could be deferred, that was identified by staff. So this one I'm just putting forward as something that recycling drop-off facilities development. So we're doing so many development, in studies in the next year. This is one that I think can be deferred. So I'm just putting that forward, basically following the advice of officers as something that can be considered to be deferred.
Okay. There are no other... Oh, sorry, there is. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Would it be possible to see the balance of recommendations here? It just seems like there's a few sort of trends developing in what we're seeing by way of recommendations. It'd be really helpful to see the package and understand if we're kind of looking at cuts across the board or if they're actually quite targeted.
We'll get through this one, and then when we've got an opportunity, we can have a small break and we can signal that to everybody. But there's a number to come. All right. Anybody else? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be voting against this and would encourage everybody to do the same. We've made real efforts in recent times to encourage to increase our waste diversion and lift our recycling focus. This is actually just going to enhance that. I guess the other thing that I just want to point out is that I feel that some of the advice from staff is a little bit misrepresented, because Schedule D, which is continually referred to, is not officer recommendations on what we should be deferring or reducing. Those were very reluctant ideas for elected members to consider. And so I just want to remind people that it is not officers' advice to take this action. It is, look, if you absolutely have to consider something, here's something you could consider. And so just to make sure that people remember actually where those suggestions came from. I don't think if we had staff presenting every recommendation that they would be saying their best advice is that we defer these recommendations, so these programs, sorry. So I'm not supporting this. I think it goes against the direction that we've been heading around recycling and waste minimisation, and I would encourage you to vote against it.
Back to you, Councillor, for right of reply. Okay, we'll put it to the vote. And that has failed, 5 votes for and 10 against. Okay, we'll move to the next one. An additional motion around the capital program again and deferring the program to 23-24 year. Program 1476, and this is 21,000 round City Centre Laneways program. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Acknowledging the comments that have been made about Schedule D, it is in the Category 4, which has been put forward as potentially for us to consider, could be deferred. It's quite a small program, but I think this probably better sits with the streetscape, city streetscape, and to be delivered in conjunction with that rather than isolation. So I think this makes sense to defer. Okay,
Councillor Dennison.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to emphasise, this was in the Category 4 originally, and so, you know, it is a minor amount, but I think still that's why I was open to seconding it. Thank you.
All right. We've got nobody else. You don't need a right to reply? Okay, we will vote, please. Okay, we'll do that one. That has failed, 4 votes for and 11 against. We've got one more in this package and then we'll have a small break and then we'll share what's out there. Okay, this is additional motion around the capital program. Committee recommends that the budget for the following program is deferred to 23-24. Program 1196, 252,000 around cemeteries. At Kelvin Grove, replacement and enhancement of staff facilities. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. This is one that is outlined on page 73. So the reason I've put this forward is that there's also a program carried forward for renewals for 266,000 for cemeteries, crematorium office reconfiguration. So that's included this year as well. And so I thought rather than progressing both of those, that it would make sense that this one could be deferred for a year.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. If we could get a staff comment on impact, considering the carry forward as well as this.
Kathy.
Kathy Deaver-Todd, Group Manager, Parks and Logistics. So this program, councillors, was on the 2018 LTP, recognising that as you increase the levels of service at the cemetery, you also increase the number of staff working at the cemetery. The staff aren't sitting on each other's laps, but they just about are. They really have nowhere, no private toileting facilities away from the public ones. They don't have any lockers, they don't have any space, and we're really constrained. The 2018 program provided for a new staff facility building. As part of the 2021 LTP, we re-looked at that and said, actually, if we reconfigured the crematorium as part of the seismic program, we could address these staff issues and upgrade the public toilets within the building envelope if we put in the separate program. So that's what we did. With the same amount of money, we split it into the two programs. The implications of deferring this would be that those staff issues would still exist because it's only the cemetery manager and the administration officer that are moving up to the top office. So this would remain and continue. We are not addressing that ongoing welfare issue for the staff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I thought these programs were being put up because they couldn't be delivered. That was the whole purpose of the 15 million, was saying that we couldn't deliver these. Well, we can deliver these. And this is false representation, I'm thinking. And I mean, I'm absolutely appalled that this has been put up, because I went out there a couple of years ago, and I mean, in COVID, where the staff have to have public facilities, this is absolutely appalling. So I think you need to look at these, and I'm sure this is not going to be voted. A lot of the stuff, Councillor Naylor, is just wasting our time. And I'm sorry if that's personal, but it is. And I'm getting pretty frustrated about it when we've got, you know, health and safety issues, and we've spent all this time. If the program is not going to be able to be, and it was going to save us rates, it's not. If these programs, staff say, look, we can't deliver them in this year, I'm happy to relook at it. But I suggest that we look at, if there's any more of these, just get a checklist, because I'm not voting for anything that can be delivered. And as I say before, it's false representation. There's health and safety issues, and I just think it's very poor form. And I'm getting quite titchy about it.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Beatty's comments, but to address this particular suggested cut, I have noticed that there's a pattern amongst some elected members of trying to deprioritise anything that involves an improvement in facilities for staff. And I'm not going to support it because of that. Our staff have worked through COVID in very difficult environments. We hear on a regular basis how difficult it is for staff retention and attraction. We've already made a significant cut to the remuneration budget, and to my mind, you know, deferring much needed upgrades to staff facilities at the cemetery. I mean, words are failing me really to be able to describe the kind of level of, yeah, I think it's best I don't use those words because I might get called upon a code of conduct. Let's just say I won't be supporting it, and I would advise the mover that if there's much more of this, she's actually going to, you know, people are going to be feeling, you know, more and more annoyed and less likely to support, because these things that are being put up are just put up to thwart the will of council, and we're getting tired of it.
The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm absolutely not supporting this. Staff wellbeing's been a real target of this annual budget, and it's really, really disappointing to see. We have continual reporting through finance and audit around our health, safety and wellbeing of our staff. Elected members make very encouraging comments when that report is presented, but then when it actually comes to putting things into action, we step back and try to put roadblocks in place. Addressing facilities that are going to enhance staff wellbeing for the people who work within this space should absolutely not be on the chopping block. Through the past 2 long-term plans, we have put real focus into increase our levels of service within our cemeteries. One effect of this is that our capacity grows and our team grows. That means that we need to address space and staff facilities. This is a solution to that. This is addressing the, I guess, essentially the problems that we created when we increased the levels of service. And so I'm very disappointed to see another attack on staff wellbeing, and I would like you all to vote against this and yeah, I'll be very disappointed to see continued targets on this.
Councillors, I'm not going to support it. I mean, I think the officer put a very good case for why we should be doing this week. Can I just ask everybody, there's a few comments starting to fly around, so can we just keep a lid on it, everybody included? I don't think there's been attacks throughout the annual plan on staff wellbeing. I think that's taking quite a long bow to things. So we can sit and nod and do everything, but please just keep your composure, please. This is with a straight bat. This is people trying to look at what they can do to lessen effects on our people. So if we can keep that in mind, you've all made your points very clear. I agree with some of the speakers just recently about this is absolutely a needed thing, so I won't be supporting it. But some of the comments sneaking in on all sides, please, we're going to have a break after this, and we will come back after that. So, write a reply back to you, Councillor.
This is absolutely not an attack on staff. If this program was important enough to deliver this year, then why wasn't it delivered? There is a $266,000 carry forward that was not delivered. It's in the plan, but it wasn't delivered. What I'm suggesting is, do we need both? Do we need to invest $500,000 this year? What I'm suggesting is that I support 266 now, and that I support 242 deferred. I make no apologies for responding to the submissions from our community, asking us to look at our spending. If that's hacking a few elected members off, then you'll just need to deal with that yourself. I'm doing what I was elected to do, and I will make no apologies for that.
Okay, we will put that to the vote. Thank you. And that has failed, 5 votes for and 10 against. So councillors, good time just to have a break. I'll ask the staff just to email around there's another 4, I think, another 4. So at this stage, we're going to go through those. So thank you. Timely, just have a break. We'll be back in the chamber here at 4:15. Thank you. Kia ora, everybody. Welcome back to hopefully our last quick session of Committee of Council. We've circulated the remaining additional motions. There's 4 of them. We're going to get through these quickly. And we've got an additional motion around the capital program. The budget, the following program is reduces program 2169, urban growth. Northeast Industrial Zone, I'm picking that's what the acronym is for transport. This is a carry forward program from 2058 of 2.5 million. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just before I explain this one, I just do want to give some context to my motivation for putting some additional recommendations up today, given that we did spend 15 hours on this a couple of weeks ago. I did have a really good look at the numbers. I think ratepayers, people in our community would probably be really shocked to know that we are spending 1.7 million more in operational spend, and that we're requiring 8 million more capital for this budget. And the only way we're being able to do that and maintain a 5.8 rates increase is by reducing our surplus by 5.8 million. So we're running a really tight budget if everything goes as, forward as planned. That does not give any leeway for increases throughout the year if we've only got a $300,000 or $400,000 surplus rather than what had originally been planned as a $6 million surplus. We've still got 4,000 people in our community, over 4,000, who will have rates increases of between 11 and 15%. We've also got over 3,000 ratepayers who will have increases of between 16 and 25%. Plus there are others who have higher rates increases. We owe it to those people in our community to do what we can to have a reasonable budget going forward. Our capital program being bigger than what is reasonable to deliver means that we have to rate them for what's in the plan. So this is why I'm trying to reduce. It's not all about dollar savings for this year. It's about looking short term and long term. If we've got a capital program that is unreasonable to deliver, what that means is that we need a whole lot more staff to try and make it happen so that they can say that they delivered the 100% of the plan like they said they would. We were told that last year as well. I asked the question last year, and the year before, and the year before. How realistic is it that you will deliver this? And the answer's been the same every year. Yes, we will deliver it all. So that is where I'm coming from. So the next 3 items, this one is outlined on page 100 of the budget. And on page 100, there are $9.6 million worth of carry forwards in the transport area. So a few weeks ago, the General Manager told us that we had spent $400,000 out of the 18 million of growth programs for this year. So I guess I'm putting it to you that do we need all of those programs carried forward into this year when we only needed 400,000 of them last year? So this one is a $5 million program that's been carried forward because we didn't need it. As I indicated earlier, I think officers are probably in a better position to be able to identify which programs are more realistic to deliver or not realistic to deliver, so I haven't had an opportunity to get specific officer advice on the specific program, but I'm looking at that $5 million program and I'm thinking I don't think that's realistic to be delivering that all in the next year, given the growth programs that have been required in the last year, so that this is one to propose to reduce from 5 million to 2.5 million, given that there are numerous other growth programs in the transport area. My preference would have been to indicate to officers to identify where there can be some reductions and bring that to us, but I think we've run out of time for that. So I'm putting this forward as a pragmatic way to reduce some of those, that overall growth spend that probably won't be needed in the coming year.
Can I just ask the officer, in your opinion, will you deliver this 5 million or 2.5?
Through the chair, I'll talk. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Naylor, for the comment on growth. Historically, part of the challenge, part of the reason that it's always looked like the infrastructure unit hasn't delivered its budgets is because the growth hasn't been timed in the budget to when it's needed. So the paper that we put up on the 26th of May showed that we'd actually really cut the amount of growth for this coming financial year, not cut, moved to further years where it is needed. This is the North East Industrial Zone. It's Richardson's line. The North East Industrial Zone work is all going ahead in the 22-23 year. So this is it. This is the time that this road is being built. We have carried forward a lot because it is always developer driven or need driven, but this is the right time now. But to reassure you, we had a 28 million budget for growth for 22-23 in the long-term plan. That's now 7.6 million, just to reflect how much we've moved on because it's not realistic to deliver it this year.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask a question about that?
Yes.
Just if there's only 7.6 million in growth programs, is that including all these carry forwards? Because that alone adds up to 9.6, and just in the transport area.
Through the chair, no. The carry forwards are the the growth carry forwards are on the next page. If you look at that was page 25 for the capital new. If you look at the carry forwards, that does flag growth there. Although it's not 9.9, it's 3.3. So there might be some things that are titled growth, but that aren't counted as growth budgets.
Can I ask how much growth carry forward that we've got on top of the 7.6 million then? So are you saying that we've got carry forwards growth as well as other growth programs of 7.6 million?
Yeah. Through the chair, the 2022-23 proposed budget for growth now is 7.6 million. There is a 3.3 million carry forward from 2021-22 of projects that are defined as growth projects. So that would be 10 point, or maybe somewhere near 11 if you add them up, I'm guessing.
So my problem with understanding what you're saying is that that program alone is 5 million, so it just doesn't add up. If you're telling us that there's only 3.3 million carry forwards, I can see many more millions of carry forwards just on that one page in the transport area.
Through the chair, what I'm saying is that the growth, the majority of the growth spend this year will be in the North East Industrial Zone. The only other growth spend that I believe we've got is Customs Street.
Mr. Mayor, I'll withdraw that one. It's not clear and it's not making sense in terms of the numbers that are in this plan, but there's no point progressing this on that basis.
Okay. Thank you. That helps. Appreciate it. All right. If the two that are in the queue, if they could take themselves out, please. Right. We now move to the next one, a capital program. The committee recommends that the budget for the following program is reduced. Program 902, seismic strengthening of council properties, reduced from 3.662 million to 2.4.
So the rationale in this is that there is a 1.2 million carry forward for the same program. So that's outlined on page 63. So there's 3.6 million for program 902, plus there's 1.2 million carry forward from the same program. So this is reducing the 3.6 to 2.4 in recognition that there's also the 1.2 million carry forward. So the total would be 3.6.
Okay. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, a question. You can probably predict what it is. Would like to understand the impact, and I'd like to also know what evidence we have around deliverability.
Bryce Hosking, Group Manager Property. So there was 2 planned strengthening projects for next financial year. The crematorium strengthening project, which the carry forward is entirely contributing towards. And all up, that'll be a shade over $3 million. So, and then on top of that is also kicking off the CAB seismic strengthening work. So the design is currently just been submitted for consent for the CAB. So the implications of deferring this or reducing that down is we would not be doing any strengthening work in this building at all next financial year. I guess some context to that, we'd already looking at deliverability in February, we'd already deferred $2.5 million out of the CAB project into next year as well. So there's actually $12 million worth of CAB strengthening work next year already. So should we reduce this further, that number would have to go up next year, which would actually possibly create a deliverability issue for next year.
Sorry, when you say next year, at the end of that, which year is the
Sorry,
next year?
2023-24, the following year.
And the crematorium works, that's already under contract?
That's already under contract. We're just locking in a start date at the moment.
Great, thank you.
Just while I've got you up, Bryce, could I get an understanding, because, I mean, the numbers just keep climbing and climbing and climbing in this building. What are we actually doing in this building in terms of the strengthening? We seem to have been doing it for many, many years.
We've been doing a lot of the fire upgrade work for the last probably 4 years or so, which is actually a precursor to all of the seismic stuff. So there's been a lot of that going on. There has also been some pre-seismic strengthening work in terms of bracing of the in-ceiling facilities, pipes, aircon, things like that, replacing the old heavy seismic tiles. Things to that nature. They don't actually form part of the seismic strengthening of the building. They're all precursor stuff that we would have to do as part of getting a building consent. In terms of the strengthening work that we're doing in this building, well, there's quite a bit. It's everything from looking at the external stairwells through to strengthening the basement. Pretty much this council chamber needs some work. There's quite wide-ranging amounts of strengthening work to varying degrees throughout the building.
Okay, it'd be good to get some visibility on that at some stage in more detail.
Definitely.
Okay, Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I've got grave concerns about, like all of these recommendations which are being put up. This is very much planning by committee. It's planning on the fly. I don't believe that there is any kind of sort of business planning sort of an input that's actually going into the decision making that's actually taking place here in the chamber. We're making decisions really on the fly without any real understanding of consequences or risk. And there are insufficient processes around that consideration process. So I just can't support any of these recommendations because it is just as being done on the fly. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, just in regard to earthquake strengthening, I can't see that there's any sense in deferring earthquake strengthening from one year to the next. If it can be done, it's better that it's done sooner. None of us knows when an earthquake might actually strike, and I wouldn't like to be in the position that people were injured or worse because the earthquake strengthening had been deferred. As well as that, we're on a timetable with earthquake strengthening. We only have so long to get it done. And then we've got the consequence of piling on work into the outer years. So I can't see that there's any sense in this at all, honestly. It just seems to be, it's not going to be helpful in any respect. And in regards to some of the other comments that were made, I'll make some general comments about our budget when we have the opportunity. But, I think all of us are trying to do our best to reduce the burden on ratepayers, but that has to be balanced with providing adequate services, making sure that we're providing everything that we have to provide legally, and doing our duty in terms of health and safety to staff. So the only consideration isn't burden on ratepayers. It's one consideration. It has to be balanced against other things. And I'm really pushing back against the narrative that only some people are interested in reducing rates and the rest of us don't care. I put an incredible amount of time and effort 2 weeks ago and for many weeks before that into looking at where we might be able to make reductions. And I know that others did too. I'm not saying it was just me. So I do reject the narrative that there's, you know, that we don't all share the same objective, which is to keep rates as reasonable as possible for ratepayers. I'm sure that we do. But there is also a balance to be struck between our duties and obligations to the community as a whole and to our staff. So just leave it at that. Thanks.
Look, before I go back to write a reply, can we have the motion back up again, please? So, yeah, look, earthquake strengthening of buildings is a vexed subject. I think it's something that we've got to, Councillor Johnson is right, it's something that we're mandated to do. The only thing I struggle with in this organisation is the level of sight on what we're actually doing with some of this work. And I don't deem that operational, I deem that we just need to know what is going on. I work in this building daily and I just see workmen every day in here, and I've got some colleagues that do some friends that work in this building, and they're just consistently here on a daily basis. I just would like a bit of an oversight on what that looks like and whether it's some of the right decisions for us to be making it at the higher level. But look, I can't support this because I do think we need to carry on. I mean, I think the crematorium, although I didn't support it at the time, because I think we were price takers, but we've got to do that work. And there obviously is some work to do in this building, which just continues and continues and continues. So I won't support it, but I do understand what the mover is trying to do. Back to you, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. There is some rationale for this reduction, given that 1.2 million has been carried forward that hasn't been delivered. Now, I'm a bit concerned to hear of work that's going to be happening in the CAB building, given that we're progressing the civic and cultural precinct, which includes consideration of how this building will be get used. I would hate to see millions of dollars spent on this building, then to have to see that repeated if there are to be other changes made. So I think taking a more cautious approach. I know there is a time frame around us needing to address some of that, but I also think we need to be considerate of the other pieces of work that might actually feed into that. And I think it's possibly preferable to actually defer it for a year, given the civic and cultural precinct work as well.
Okay, we will vote, please. And that has failed 3 votes for and 12 against.
I'll skip the next one. There's not an appetite, obviously, for reductions.
Appreciate it, thank you. Right, the next one will be skipped. Right, we'll come to this one. This is around additional motion around operational reduction from Schedule C, that the budget for the following program is deferred. Program 1494, 154,000 around the active public transport planning and investigation. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. This one is different to the previous ones in that it's an operational reduction, and it was outlined on Schedule C of our papers last time, and I'm not quite sure why it wasn't discussed, but I'm proposing that it be deferred. It is yet another planning and investigation. We've got so many significant investments in planning and investigation in the current year, and I think this one has been identified by officers as potentially being able to be deferred, so I would support its deferral, and that certainly does have a direct impact on rates, being an operational program.
Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, staff comment on impact, please, and understanding how our planning of active transport fits with our capital budget alignment in the forward years.
Hamish Friedenby, GM Transport and Development. This is for the investigation into how the public transport will work with the new route for the Horizons are putting forward, so a business case to get through that one.
Great, thank you.
Okay, right a reply, councillor? Okay, we'll put it to the vote, please. And that has failed. 5 votes for and 10 against. Okay. What we're going to do now is go to the substantive. So we're through the amendments. You'll be pleased about that. And this is around finalising the annual budget plan for 2022-23. The committee recommends that the council adopt the annual budget plan 2022-23, incorporating any amendments. I'll look to move it, seconded by Deputy Mayor. Now, what I'm going to do, councillors, about the budget in general, is please, I'm not going to speak on this. I think I'll direct if you could direct your comments to the 29th June meeting. Otherwise, we still have a part 2 item to get through, and we've still got a couple other things to tidy up. So if we could do that, I think we're all going to, everyone will have their say and a decent crack at it. But if we start to do that now, we've got lots more to go through. So I'm not going to say anything. I'm asking you not to say anything. Good, we've got a deal. So we will vote, please. It has passed 13 votes for and 2 against. Right, we now go to 2, 3 and 4, and I will read this out for our people online. Again, finalising the annual budget, the plan for 2022-23, committee recommends number 2, that the council delegate authority to the mayor and acting chief executive to approve the final annual budget plan 22-23 for publication. 3, that the council confirms the adoption of the annual budget plan 22-23 is a significant decision within the parameters of the Local Government Act 2002, and that council is satisfied that all submissions have been considered and that there has been compliance with the decision-making and consultation requirements of the Act. Number 4, that council delegate authority to the acting chief executive to authorise payments to council-controlled organisations and other external organisations in accordance with the respective service level agreements. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillor Barrett, you're breaking the rules. Would you like to speak?
With a question, just to ensure that anything that we're deciding here doesn't cut across the recommendation yet to come around adjustment to the annual budget document presentation.
Okay, we might take that first, sorry, just in terms of the order. Okay, so this is around, again, finalising the annual budget plan for 2022-23. So this is number 5. This is an additional one from Councillor Barrett. And the final annual budget 23 document includes visual content demonstrating the community-wide rates impact of adjustments made to the uniformed annual general charge and differentials during the annual budget 23 process. So, Councillor, do you just want to speak to that? I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Just very briefly, we heard this morning from officers that to get a graph in there, we need a recommendation. This delivers that.
That's cool. Thank you. All right. What we'll do is we'll vote on, if there's no more comments, we'll vote on number 5 first, and I'll ask you to vote, please. As passed, 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, we'll go back to the other substantives, number 2, 3 and 4. I've read them out. I'm not expecting any comments. Thank you. We will vote. As passed, 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. Look, we now will look to resolve that the meeting be extended to 7 p.m. We'll make that 5:30, please. I'll look to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. No discussion. We will vote, please. That's 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right, we now have to move into part 2, so as exclusion of the public. The committee resolves that the public be excluded from the following parts of the meeting listed in the table below. This is around confidential negotiations and awarding of a contract around the new animal shelter building. I'll look to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. There being no discussion, we will vote, please. A couple of councillors still to vote, please. Just check you voted. I'll do that myself. That's passed, 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right. We're now moving to our confidential part of the meeting.